we're going to go through each one. The artists are here, so it's wonderful for you guys to get to hear from them. So we'll start here upstairs and work our way around the galleries, and then tomorrow there'll be the public programs, and then on Monday we'll have more time to talk more in depth. So we'll save as much of our time today to be able to hear from the artists. So Matt Rich, Victoria Fu, this is their installation, and I will hand it over to you.
So yes, I'm Matt Rich. And
I'm Victoria Fu, and I have some notes here, so I'm not texting while I'm talking to you all, just so you know.
But this is our exhibition called Monster A, and we collaborated on all the work in this exhibition. I'll just say that I'm typically I'm a painter. I have my own career as a painter, and she is a video artist, film, video, photography, and she has her own career as that. And in 2017, we started to collaborate, and we've had maybe 4 or 5 shows as a collaborative team. And so this is our most recent, and we're very proud of it.
We started collaborating because, I mean, we're partners in life as well.
Yes, I'm married to her, and we have kids.
And our studios are usually in really close proximity to each other, so we end up like spilling on top of each other and overlapping. At first it was just kind of fun, and then we started documenting it. The first prompt that actually made us formalize the partnership was a show at a space called The Suburban that's run by artist and writer Michelle Grabner. And it had started in her garage, and now it's a more formal gallery. But that context of like putting something together for a domestic kind of
non-commercial gallery in her home. So we were
it just made us think about making objects together. What would we want to make together? And how would we mix our respective sensibilities and processes and aesthetics?
How long do we have?
About like 15 minutes.
Okay.
Just because we're going to try and get through all of them.
Absolutely.
So what are these objects?
Maybe 20.
Okay.
We call them aprons, but they are also printed images. They're printed images on fabric. They are props for performances, sculptures as objects. They're also like paintings, and we hang them and talk about them sometimes like paintings.
Yeah, I mean, even a bigger overview, we have these fabric objects on the wall. We built these pedestals, and we also have these vinyl photographs that have been placed on walls, behind aprons, on the tops of these custom pedestals. And the fourth element in the show is these neons. We made 3 neon sculptures. So that's the very big overview. We have fabric pieces, sculptural objects, vinyl prints, and neons.
And because we're mixing so many processes, I mean, they are also very wearable garments, right? They're usually scaled to a body. So you'll notice over there on hooks, and there are hooks sort of everywhere scattered around the show. There are aprons for people to literally wear. If you want, you can take an apron off, and viewers can walk around with them for, I guess, as long as they wish, as long as they don't walk off with them.
And we have empty hooks right above Cassandra, right between those 2 doorways there, and on the edge of that wall over there. And in theory, people can put on an apron there, walk, and then take it off and hang it on that hook before they proceed to the next show. So that can be a sort of living, interactive part of the exhibition.
And perhaps we can just say a few things about our process. That could be something that's interesting for people to hear. So because I'm a video artist, we were working a lot with my video and film projections, as well as taking film stills digitally and collaging them, and also the colored lights that I would use in video shoots. And we were putting those on top, mixing them with Matt's painted surfaces.
Right, so how do we collaborate? We generate a bunch of images, and some of those images come from, as she's saying, screen grabs from her video. So that top of that apron over there has a bit of purple on the top of it. That is actually the purple of the San Diego sunset and Point Loma Cliff, sunset cliff. So that is a 16mm film that she took and she used in some video. And then we took one still from that video and printed that on a piece of fabric. Below it are a series of objects that are scattered on the studio floor. There's a piece of orange canvas, and then there's some things I use in the studio. There's plexiglass and some tacks. And that's a photograph of something that happened in the studio. So we gather all these images from different places. On the top, if I can just keep turning you guys around back and forth, the top of this image here. So we don't just use images from my paintings. like this, and images from her video. We also sometimes, with this sort of domestic theme in mind, we use objects from the home. So this is actually like a sheepskin carpet from Costco, and we laid it on the floor of the studio, and we actually illuminated it with a blue light and a red light, and so that's why it got this sort of interesting rich color, and we photographed it. So we have a giant file of photographs. And then what we do is sometimes those photographs get printed on vinyl, and they end up like this. Sometimes those photographs get printed on long pieces of fabric. And those rolls of fabric get delivered to our studio. And we cut them up, and we piece them together, and that's how the aprons get made.
And one tidbit too, the bigger sort of funny shaped wall vinyl behind that rainbow apron, that's also made similarly as we did with this fur rug, except it's a pair of our son's pants, just like a
We just had him in here and we said, Adam, do you recognize that? He said,
he started smiling.
yeah, I do. It's much bigger than my normal, he's 3 years old, but yes, those are my pants. So, you know, we're drawing inspiration from all these different places, and they become images, and we print them in different ways. So, and that is why when Victoria says these things are kind of hung like paintings, they are, right? And this is sort of the space of painting, this vertical surface, the space of looking. And they're collaged together, they're on fabric, so they're kind of like paintings. But they are technically photographs, so they are also like photographs.
And aprons.
And they're also wearable, so they're aprons, yeah.
And I have to say, our definition of apron has definitely been flexed sort of beyond maybe what you might picture as an apron. So we started very, very apron-like, you know, very recognizable, and now we're down to a sort of flat piece of fabric that should be hung over your current state of dress or undress, with either a place for your head, whether it's like straps that would wind around in your limbs,
or the head can go here.
Pole. And it's supposed to be somewhat imaginative or flexible, but it is organized around a body. So for our past shows and for this show as well, we collaborate with performers who are also artists. And we usually give them the creative freedom to make their work, but with our objects. So last show we had Las Vegas-based artist Marcus Sivan, and he wrote a whole script, and he had a whole ensemble of volunteer performers. And for this show, it's Matt Savitsky, who's an LA-based performance artist, and it should be really great. He'll be using mannequins and mannequin parts, and he's really thinking about the body and wearing these things in interesting ways.
Right, I mean, he's going to do 2 performances. One starts at 11 a.m. tomorrow morning, and the other one is going to be in August sometime. And he is going to come and he's going to work with those aprons on the wall here, and he's going to wear them, and he's already started to sort of, we sent them some to sort of experiment, but it just proves the point that there's multiple ways you can wear some of these aprons. Like this apron, I don't know, I mean, you could wrap one body in many different ways. You could drag it behind like a long tail, but you could also, we could probably wrap all of us. We could probably, that strap is big enough that we could somehow be in a sort of collective unit. So we like that possibility, and we like having other people who use their bodies and think about performance to come in and interpret that, yeah.
Chicken egg question maybe,
Yeah.
but what came first? Were you looking to create something that could be performance related, or were you looking to create wearable art? And then my second question is, are any of these pieces painted directly on?
No.
That's a great question, really.
Yeah, the second question is an easy one. No, but it's...
They're all images,
yeah.
and that feels important to our
it's tempting.
sort of crossover.
And I will say it's very hard to go back as a painter, to go back into my studio and see this, but see it's only like this big. And then also not to be able to make somehow giant marks really fat. Like it screws with it messes with the scale of painting, the painted mark, which I like, but it's problematic.
And to answer your first question...
Which is a great question.
I mean, because they're now sort of loosely defined aprons, we still hang on to the word apron when describing this stuff, because by that, as a starting point, it necessarily implies that you're thinking about the body all the time. The performance collaborations came later, like the opportunity, the budget, all that stuff, but it made so much sense for us, but neither of us really, choreographed performance, so we knew it would be kind of this other growth.
So we didn't think performance, but we definitely thought about body, I think.
And let's show them. So
Yeah.
a lot of these aprons, if you walk with us, we'll just show you how the definitions have expanded a little bit. There are aprons that could inhabit more than one person, like this giant X apron right here. You could imagine where heads and limbs could go, but also there could be, 5 people.
Yeah. Or this apron could be worn like this somehow, or it could be worn like this, or it could go through two legs maybe, and then this strap could be used to sort of hang it over the neck. So it can edit the body in interesting
And this
ways.
one could be worn upside down or right side up, and also the absence of it is maybe more interesting than the presence of it, right?
And I think that absence actually makes it seem wrong when you wear it right. It makes it seem like something else is supposed to happen, I think.
This one Matt likes to wear as a little bit of a diaper type thing.
Oh yeah. It's just, we made it like this. So I made it as a, we made it as a flat image. And then sometimes you don't know until you put it on that it seems like this funny thing here is definitely, are you really recording this? It just seems to please don't take any pictures, no pictures. I mean, it just seems so much more right like that, no? I wish I hadn't done that.
So also thinking about your question, where did you go?
Right there.
There you go. Yeah, thinking about your question too, like that's how our installations have evolved a little bit with not only the vinyl, but these sort of stage-like pedestals that we custom made for the show. I mean, these walls existed before, but the stage that you see on the floor, it's sort of waiting for something. It almost feels, it's a pedestal, yes, but it's also somewhat of a stage. So thinking about the body still and maybe these vinyls as backdrops.
So the concept, the term itself, apron, is very accessible for most viewers, and it's a great through point, starting point.
Exactly.
And then which pieces are allowed to be just the hanging ones?
The ones on hooks.
The ones on hooks, okay.
Yeah. You had
Look at that, look at that.
You had a question?
Yes. You're mostly in pictures and fabric. How did you just move to neon?
Okay. Oh. I've been using neon in my work because I also think of it as, projected light, like my videos, but also moving image. So like when I've had ones that have 2 patterns that are flashing, and I think of that as moving image too. And it made a lot of sense in my work as kind of mixing with the other projected images in the room. And in this case, we were really thinking about the symbol of the apron, and when there's a neon sign, like a lot of times, the symbol of a molar is for the dentist, we were thinking about the idea of hooks and what that could symbolize, and just, aprons are so symbolic in that way, so
Yeah, I would say that, our first show, we hung the aprons 2 different ways. We hung them flat against the wall, with nails, don't move them, they're flat, they're available as images like paintings. We also had aprons on hooks, which are not visually as available. They're available in a different way. You can't see the compositions, they're available for you to touch, right? So there was a very clear divide between things to look at and imagine wearing, and then things to be aware that you can touch and sort of imagine what they look like, or immediately she started to do things, and then you look at them based on how people hold them and how people wear them, which is different than when you see them against the wall.
So Matt, the point being, now you're getting to my question. These are okay because they're on these white hooks.
Correct.
A lot of things, no.
Correct.
Right? You don't just jump up on the pedestal and grab something, right? I'm a little, want to make sure I
No,
know exactly.
yes, that's correct. Cassandra's giving me a hard no, which I think is right. Which I think is
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I think that's what we have to say. I don't think it's the end of the world if someone touches one or whatever. They're clearly and carefully placed, the ones that are not on hooks. So, if something gets messed with, we'll return them to the way that Matt and Victoria want them.
If somebody looks like they're going to cry if they don't get to touch it, then, But the performer is going to get on top of that, and on top of that, but he's a, trained professional.
Yeah.
I'm not quite done with your question, but
So
yeah.
is that one back there on the wall?
That's also a hook.
That's
a hook, so we can take these and put them over there.
Okay.
Wait, which one?
No, that.
Oh, purple bell. No hook.
No, this one, right to the left of the yellow neon hook. Is that a, okay? That one?
No.
No hook. Don't touch this one.
That's not
yeah, there's no hook.
There's no hook. But you can take those.
You can easily see when you're right in front of it that there's no hook. They're nailed.
So you didn't say no hook?
No hook, nowhere. No hooky, no
If they're not hanging on a hook, they're nailed to the wall.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So don't wear.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy to remove it.
So, but I want to so I just want to just finish that answer, because I think, you know, there was this very clear divide between things to look at and things to touch and wear, and then we started to complicate that. So, like she said, with the pedestals, these things are sort of active as three-dimensional objects, but also sort of composed as things to look at. So I think that with this gesture, or with that gesture on the post over there, or any other place where it's not just a flat thing on the wall, we're starting to sort of animate them a little bit for the viewer. And I think the same, and we like how that sort of puts these things in motion. There's a gray area, as we said, painting, sculpture, performance object, garment, utilitarian, there are all these things mixed together. And I think that one of the desires of the hooks to sort of bring in this commercial element, or this sort of the symbol of the hook, is to complicate the sort of utilitarian presentation of them. So we wanted to sort of, you know, muddy that water a little bit by presenting the hooks as an image, not just as a utilitarian item.
One of the things that I think might be helpful that occurs to me in kind of pulling all this together is the title and the thinking behind the title as this kind of hybrid form. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, by the way,
And
we
even
have...
the titles of individual pieces too, I think plays into that.
about that. By the way, we have a PDF of a catalog with really great essays that also really gets into the monster thing. The proof is right there, and we'll try to leave it up front if anyone's interested.
And
We
we'll
also
see if
have...
we can get copies
Yeah.
of the essays inside it to share with all of you.
So you'll notice in our main wall text description, the main didactic, it talks about Frankenstein. So that's sort of the first reference that comes to mind to talk about now. Just this like sewing together of disparate parts, also just our collaboration, just trying to get all these different elements into one sort of new thing. And then these aprons are so anthropomorphic, right? Like they're like these little monsters, like that guy over there with the two little red eyes. Like a lot of times we were really thinking about the straps as surrogate bodies and, you know, as skins.
The two over there holding hands.
Right.
Yeah, two holes, yeah. We call those our social aprons.
So they're like these little critters to us as well. And also, A is the initial of our son. So it's also the first.
And A stands for apron, but I think the real, you want to tell the Monstera story? I mean, yeah, I mean, she was thinking, we were brainstorming about different, you know, compositions, and these compositions get sort of made up and brought into being by process, but she was thinking about using a Monstera leaf as a
philodendron, those big kind of bushy
as an inspiration for an apron, and can't remember where that idea went. It got processed through maybe somewhere in here, but then she was looking at that word Monstera and then moved the A over and it became Monster A, so it was a sort of a layered discovery for her. But I like this, I mean, you know, the idea of monster, and again, the essays, I would point you to the essays because they speak pretty eloquently about this. But yeah, for me, I mean, they're assembled things from multiple different parts, they're hybrid units. And I, you know, think about, we haven't talked about sort of the apron as a concept, but something that can be both in the studio and at home, and you know, what's that?
Yeah, sorry.
Go.
No, and just one last thought that could be helpful along those lines. Thinking about the space as a mixture between a domestic space, a retail space, I mean, really apropos to this building as well, and an art space, a museum space. So those three things, that's what we were thinking about when we were trying to figure out the custom spaces, the wallpaper, the flow of the room, etc.
You want to say something about skin?
I think that might be a great place to stop. Maybe if we can take one more question. If we're going to get through everything, we have to keep moving. But yeah, last question, comment.
With relationship to the shapes that you've come up with and interacting with collage images, did you create a collage and then the shape came to you as you looked at it? Or did you make something and go, well, I don't know how somebody would put that on, that's out? You know, in other words, what was your decision-making process in coming together with collaborating on the visual piece versus the sculptural element?
I kind of feel like it was different for every piece. We almost
There's no one explanation.
Sometimes
there was a drawing, and we sort of found pieces to execute that drawing.
A drawing of the
like a drawing of like a linear, like a sketchbook. You're drawing of the shape of the apron, and then we looked around the room for bits of fabric that could fit interestingly.
Image dictated the shape.
Sometimes, if I can maybe go over here. Sometimes this like I think this square happened because maybe there was a cutout of something else and this square was there, and so we decided to have a square come out. So sometimes the shape of the image, will dictate, there's no good examples here. Yeah, will dictate what the, like I think for example, that circular bottom over there was responding to that blue in the middle of that. And that's that same fur image that ended up on the pedestal over there. So you can see one image actually went 2 different places in this
And then
show.
other times it was dictated by how we wanted a body to wear it. Like we wanted a smaller one, or one that really had a lot of straps, or really just covered and just had like a head hole.
Because there's a real range of shapes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Did you construct the image yourselves?
We did not sew them. We're not good enough to.
Thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. What I think it might make more sense, this is York Chang. We're going to start with his exhibition that's directly behind us over here, and then we'll work our way around, what is that, clockwise?
Monday I won't be here, I have a question.
I can send it to you. Did they get something today? Did they get like a paperwork today?
No, just from last time.
Oh, last time.
I'll get you. I'll get you. Oh. Do you want a videotape? I'll get you. Do you want?
Hi everyone, my name is York Chang,
What is everybody else?
and this is my show titled Wrong with Infinite Precision. And the title of the show comes from a phrase in a book by a statistician but also a philosopher. His name is Nassim Taleb. And in the book, that phrase is used to reference the ways in which people manage complexity and ambiguity in our information age. And his argument is that there is a tendency for people to, in order to deal with that complexity, apply different constructs to help manage the information, whether it's narratives, whether it's searching for patterns, categories. All of those things are these sort of artificial constructs that are used that allow people to feel like they are in control of the information that they're subjected to, but in fact may lead them to an entirely wrong place. But all along the way, there's a tendency towards reaffirming that, towards finding and picking and choosing evidence in order to sort of further bolster the narrative that they've constructed. And so those kinds of tendencies, I think, kind of are at play in the show. And I'm really interested in the sort of play between subjectivity, this sense of what you feel, and those kind of judgments associated with qualities and experience, all those things, opinions, the sort of interplay between that and the idea of objectivity and truth and factuality, and how in our world these things are constantly at play and constantly at attention, and there's real political consequences as well. So a lot of my work is really most interested in what's happening in the public sphere in a way, at least to bring into the sort of works. And so the kind of source material I sort of draw on are things that have to do with the question of the relationship between aesthetics and politics, and how they influence each other and how they sort of exert gravity on each other. And part of that has to do with my background. I was trained as a lawyer and an artist, and so it's just been a personal journey of mine, how to sort of reconcile these different types of positions in the world and different sort of worldviews. I think at a certain point in time I lived very, segregated and compartmentalized lives, and it felt wrong, and it felt like really the richness of what was happening in the studio really came when I was really asking those questions about how these different practices really actually are a single sort of life practice, where all these things are interrelated. I started practicing law more like a dramatist, understanding that trials are theater, and that persuasion is working a lot of different levers other than simply rationality. And then in art, not taking for granted that subjectivity is all there is to that type of work, and that there is this sort of real questioning and criticality that is possible in art, and that it has a role to play in terms of raising awareness about what is happening in the world. So that's kind of the sort of internal framework of I think what guides a lot of the work in the show. But as far as the materials and the sources that I draw on, I really am interested in analog systems. Yeah. So. Labor attorney for unions. So, which is
what do you view as your day job?
Let's do focus here, and then we can ask some of those questions. I want to pick up with the analog.
Sure. That's a good question.
It's a good question.
So I think in terms of the kind of, I'm interested in the analog. I think part of the idea is referencing a different time when the information that we were receiving had a real material quality to it. It has subject to friction and wear and tear and gravity, and it has the feeling of having consequence and presence in the world. And so, I started as an artist, as a painter, for many years, and so there's still that kind of interest in terms of composition and palette and things like that. But really, I sort of shifted more as I started moving into kind of more of a research-based conceptual mode. I started becoming very interested in archives and the idea of collecting images that already exist in the world and finding the relationships between them that both have an effect in terms of drawing you in and focusing you in terms of how you look at images and consume images as consumers in the world. But some of those similar dynamics, I think, play out in looking at an artwork. It's slower, and I like the idea of slowing things down and showing the mechanical operations of how you are taking in images and how it's affecting you and your consciousness. You don't perceive it when you're flipping through phones and consuming, hundreds and thousands of images every day. It just becomes invisible, but it's having a real impact. And I think that that's something that in art contexts, when things can be slowed down, things can be reduced, things can be pared away to the point of its essentials, that there's a chance to sort of show a little bit more about how these real-world images actually function. Yeah.
Was Richard Prince an influence at all in series?
I think the entire sort of pictures generation type of work is a big influence in terms of just even. But I think it's almost to a point now where it's not much of a sort of radical stance to appropriate images so much anymore. And so it's sort of like, what's the sort of next level of use of those images. Looking at sort of maybe portraying or underscoring kind of higher orders of systems of images instead of just a single image.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's sort of on a basic level. I'm always collecting images from various newspapers, and I'm categorizing them. I have these files, and I keep them in there, and they accumulate over time. And then so a lot of my studio time is simply looking through them and looking how images sort of start to gravitate towards each other and find these sort of conceptual and aesthetic rhymes that start to happen between the images. I always take them out of any captions. I sort of strip all that away. They're all sort of, I think, floating signifiers which don't have a context, and so then they become this sort of open element that then can be sort of recombined in these different ways. And so, I think that, sometimes there's a question of labor in this kind of work, but I feel like the amount of time spent looking and sorting, all of those things are very much labor, and it's labor that's exploited in an attention economy like we have now. And so I think that's, I think what you're seeing in the show is actually a couple years of worth of sorting and categorizing and looking and finding images that suddenly find their perfect partner in a single moment. So.
Is it color or composition that draws them together, or is it the concept?
I think there's a conceptual frame that's moving everything forward, that's marshalling all the time, which has to do with the question of like how spectacle journalism and conflict is monetized, even in our sort of public information sphere. So there's a sort of collapse between entertainment and politics and advertising, and it's all happening at once. Even as we consume things that we believe are separated into these different categories. And so for me, I think that that's what these are about. Now, there's also just simply aesthetic reactions, and a lot of times the aesthetic reactions do have to do with this sort of tension between sort of figurative or the messy and non-geometric, and then also these sort of geometries that also imply a certain futility at the analytical. The grids that we think order everything are another narrative fallacy. And so, combining them, I think that's what I'm thinking about when I'm combining the grid and these sort of figurative elements. Yeah.
I love your term, spectacle journalism. Can you take us through your process of the microfiche really quickly? Would you mind?
Sure.
Can I get there?
Yeah. Okay. And then to your question, microfiche are sort of these storage systems, image storage systems, and so I was really fascinated with them when I did research that these things are actually stored and they have a material necessity to them. And so I like the idea of blowing them up, called a macrofiche, and I'm putting them into a different image storage system, which is the art system, which is another important image storage system. But there's a lot of sort of layering, how things lay on top of each other, and then the information underneath is still sort of coming through and interacting with layers on top of it. And I'm also interested in this sort of marginal information that's around. Just the little bits of information that tell you these are objects, not simply JPEGs, and that tell you these are forms that I am having interact and stacking on top of each other too. So,
you would go through the tedious process of looking through a microfiche to get one image? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean,
people all relate to that, for a certain generation. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's so it's sort of this hybrid of research, but also painting and also appropriation sort of kind of a process.
So, when you were talking about collecting images, can you say more about the literal process? Are you, I mean, I see that there's some microfiche, and some of us in here remember using that a lot. Getting dizzy doing it, trying to slow down the machine. Yeah, you remember that? So, what do you collect newspapers? And then when you get this pile, of stuff, you must have to organize it somehow. So how do you make that initial cut? Because you have to come up with some method of storing and sorting. What's going on? Because you have to make a decision initially, right?
Yeah, and a lot of times the decisions are very quick and visceral and intuitive. And if it's interesting, just...
But when you do, is there a giant pile called interesting?
Yeah, I think it's just a daily activity, where I'm looking through, I see an image, I rip it out, and I do have these files. I mean, they're files that are, some of them are crowd images, some of them are red images, some of them are...
So you have thereby...
They have their own categories.
Or subject, words, something like that.
Sometimes there aren't categories obvious, but they're interesting images. They're there. Over time, maybe category forms, get stone file.
Okay.
And so there are these large archives of them.
So you're an analog store, not a digital store.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think,
Because
it's very much...
they're completely different. One, it's on a disk that you zoom through, where the other, it takes a physical space that you have to manipulate.
Yeah, and I think that's, as a painter, as an artist that is not a sort of new media or internet artist or anything like that, I am still, it's still all about the material and to the sort of confoundment of my wife. And there's large piles of these kind of materials all over the place. So.
And the categories change over time?
Yeah, they can change, and sometimes an image will just stick with me though, and then I'll be on the lookout for something that compare it, but it may take a year to find the right image. And so it's a lot of just sort of keeping things like in play and seeing where serendipity allows you to sort of play the role of a matchmaker. So.
What sources do you use? I mean, is it newspapers, magazines, all of the above?
All of the above. But I think newspapers in particular I'm interested in, also because they're sort of at this stage of near obsolescence. So there's a really interesting sort of tragic site that I always like to sort of still look at.
They would disagree with you on that.
Yes, they're still fighting.
A good fight.
A good fight.
Yeah. So unfortunately, if we're going to get through all these shows, we kind of have to keep moving. I wondered if you wanted, if there's something you just want to mention really fast, and also talk about the radio booth, and then we'll have to move on. But I will say that there's lots of text and information that we have that's available to all of you. That anything that York hasn't mentioned, we'll try and fill in any gaps. Because the thing that always amazes me when I talk to York is that with each piece, there's actually so much depth, and there's always one other layer, or one other literary reference, or one other thing that for me it's almost like the process that I'm learning about his work. Each one has that depth to it. But so we could spend 20 minutes talking about each one.
The radio, we should talk about the radio.
Yeah, so let's talk about the radio.
So radio is like another sort of different type of information system, and I'm interested in its history, especially the idea of talk radio and the extent to which it's had and exerted a certain influence on culture politically. And this radio booth kind of serves multiple functions. It's an archive of sorts of materials, ephemera, and books and papers that have to do with questions of these kind of different narrative fallacies that people use to kind of fill in the gaps in understanding and comprehension. So it's not fixed to any particular time, but this whole project is actually, I should say, a collaboration with myself and another artist, Daniel R. Small, who is also interested in these questions about narrative fallacy and in the way that people live these beautiful deceptions within their own sort of minds. And So he has also shared a lot of material for this piece. But I think it's also, besides an archive, it's a research space for asking those questions about how things like the advent of talk radio in 1987 carries forth now, and you can see the sort of echoes of what started back then in social media and in memes, where there's so much more of a reliance in terms of their economic and business model upon sort of incitement, on sort of these sort of easy push-button kind of reactions to information, rather than, you know, getting at a question of, you know, what is really underpinning these positions and the information that's being disseminated. So, and then finally, it's sort of a performance space. We're going to do 3 recording sessions here. They're going to be part sort of panel, part skits or performances that we'll be recording, and ultimately it will culminate in production of a radio transmission that will send out both, you know, try to get it live on air on some radio station, but also have it available and distributed via SoundCloud or, you know, other types of ways of getting the word out about this project. So.
Just there's some practical things, I guess, about the radio booth, is that obviously it's very tempting to want to, we have the stanchions here, but anyways, I think we'll have to, you know, manage visitors' expectations to want to go inside.
Yeah.
So any other questions for York before we move on?
One other question is, you collect everything analog, either cut out or paste or whatever. How do you then go about converting it to how you're creating? Because you didn't take the pictures and paste them onto like
Right.
a collage. So
Yeah.
what's your process being deeply analog going to digital, and do you have any feeling about doing that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's a necessary step in the process, and it's sort of. But I basically scan them, and then enlarge them. And in my studio, I have a really large format printer, and I work with different types of materials, different types of papers, including the transparent film, and print it out that way. So it's a real struggle, actually, working with that technology, because I mean, I'm not a technologically super savvy person, although over time I've developed some competence with what I have, but it's not an enjoyable part of the process. I think I much rather enjoy the clipping and the categorizing than trying to figure out how to replace a motherboard and some of that other stuff. But that's part of the work of it, and part of the way to sort of scale up these things so that they can have a voice and have a presence in the space. So.
Well, thank you. Diego's right behind us. I don't know if we can just shift our attention, and Diego, you can give us a little background on yourself and the project that you have.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Diego. I live and work in Mexico City. I study photography in Mexico City, and then I studied photography also in London for a few years. And for me, it was a time when I studied when it was this changing from analog photography to digital photography. So in the final years of my school, I was still doing analog photography. And these 2 works that are here are both analog photography. The first one is this series of portraits that you're going to see next, that I shot in a very rural area in Mexico between Oaxaca and Veracruz, in the mountains. I was covering motocross racing for a magazine. It was this Red Bull event, this energy drink. That's weird because I knew Red Bull from London more in the 2003, 2004, more regarding to the I don't know, to the raves culture and the like party thing. And when I came back to Mexico, Red Bull was like a sort of a new thing. It was not very famous at all. And I went to cover this motocross race, and in this really remote part, I was there taking pictures of the bikes, and then suddenly I realized that the Red Bulls promotional guys were giving away the Red Bulls to the farmers there. And I was like, I don't know, shocked at that moment. And I didn't think a lot at that time, but I just started to register these portraits.
Should we go look at them?
Yes, we can.
It is recording, right? It is recording, right? Yeah.
Easier to talk about over this.
Yeah. So in a way, it was a really quick reaction at the time. I just realized that that was the first time that this community saw this brand, and at that time, in 2005, it was this idea of the mega brand that was coming to the end of the world, you know, like the global brand arriving to the community in this place. There's no municipality, it's just like a farmer's land. And it's this weird moment where the energy drink that is more related to the party, to the extreme sports and stuff, is in a context of the farmers and the production, no, of this land. Now I've been thinking a lot about this and thinking a lot about the archives and the documents that you can have. I always wonder if someone will bump into this archive and say this is the time or this is the specific moment where the global brand meets the end of the community, you know, in this small place. I haven't shown this work much. This is the first time that I show it in the States. And after this kind of work, I had a lot of archive and political work, more regarding to the politics of Mexico. And in that way also relates to the next series that we can see here. And this is a series of 26 abandoned gasoline stations in Mexico. It's a homage and a remake of the famous Druche piece of 26 gasoline stations that he made in '63. I'm a big fan of Druche's work, and I am aware of all the implications that Druche has in the contemporary art world and influence many projects and artists. There's a lot of books, remake of Druche's, and a lot of jokes and a lot of production about that. And I think what interests me in this case is the political context in Mexico. In 1938, the ex-president Cárdenas expropriates the oil private companies in Mexico and made a national company, Pemex, a huge state-owned company. And since the 80s or the beginning of the 90s, there's a lot of talk about privatizing Pemex, and again putting it, selling Pemex to the private international interests. So in Mexico, the debate is really hard, and it's been a long debate. And at that time, I started to find these abandoned gasoline stations, and obviously related to Druche's, but also more to the political context in Mexico. And I was thinking that, in a way, some of them, they were sort of monuments, like if the government was trying on purpose to make the sale of the state company, you know, like to abandon the investment in the state company, so there will be more cheap, and the failure of that company was pushing the obviously privatization. So I thought of them as monuments of, if you were driving on the highway and you see this abandoned gasoline, you say Pemex is completely ruined, is broke, and in a way it's like a sort of on-purpose decaying of the brand, so it will be more easy to privatize in the future. No? So in the end, I started photographing this in 2007, and by 2014, it was the beginning of a privatization, and now, after a few years, you now can see some international private companies selling gasoline in Mexico, which when I was a kid was completely crazy. Like you will say, you will never see a Shell gasoline station here. It will be completely impossible. But now it's started to happen. No? So that's another document of that moment when the private interest arrives to another country.
Can you talk a little bit about the current context with Pemex in Mexico? And
Yeah, well now this theme of the petrol is really hard. At some point when I finished the series, the gas prices, the oil prices was going up really high, so there was a lot of protest about the price of the gasoline. And now we are in a really hard time. We have a new government that entered just like a few months ago, and they start to implement new security methods, because there was happening a lot of stealing of the gasoline in the pipes. So it's like a national crisis of stealing, and in a way reflects a lot of what is happening in the corruption and politics in Mexico. No? The state of Pemex, the way it was handled for years, it's been like opened up, and we are seeing a really heavy problem and a national crisis regarding the petrol crisis. Yeah, this stealing of the oil is called huachicoleo, and it's a word that comes from the I don't know how you say it in English, but like the adjustments of the quality of the fuel or the liquid that you're manipulating. And yeah, so now again the theme is also like really hot in Mexico regarding this stealing of petrol and oil.
Is this an issue throughout the whole country or just certain parts of the country?
I think it's more on the center of the country, but it's a general thing in whole Mexico.
Lots of people died recently from an explosion.
Yes, there was an explosion, and yeah, like 100 people died.
Yes,
it was a terrible event. Yes, but that's part of the context of the thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So next we'll talk about Fritia's exhibition, and we also have a curator, Virginia, here with us from Mexico City. Do you guys want to start at the end over there? So maybe we'll follow you and then you can lead the way.
Thank you for your help. Those files were okay.
Yeah, I think it's like I think we got all of them.
Good.
Yeah. You can let us know if
Sorry
you
for
see
the last minute.
It's okay.
You can learn.
Okay. Hello to everyone. In general, my work is most of the time related with the seeking of the concept value in many forms, from the historical value, economical value, emotional value, all this kind of value that creates society and create everything that we work with or live with. For this specific project, I was thinking much about the hierarchical way how we see most of the things and how we create hierarchies for everything, even in biological living beings, animals, vegetables. Everything is pretty much seen from the human perspective as in a different levels, in a different classifications. So from that point of view, I decided to try to make a peace with a being or a biological living creature, which is in the pretty much bottom of this I'm sorry about my English, but in these hierarchies of living creatures in the in the universe. So shells and all these boneless animals are pretty much in the bottom of this level. So I wanted to create a piece of work that is also based on under the circumstances of this creature, and also under very much not much modifications or intervention from me or for any other. The basic material that this project is based is an idea of how perils are created, and I also think a lot of how value is created and where the value is in many of the things. And specifically for this project, I wanted to think about the symbolical value that I extract from numismatic, because the images that I took to put inside the shell, there are symbols that I found in many of the numismatic, in the history of numismatic in human. So I select 7 of these symbols that are connected in many of the symbols that are in the money around the world, as a way to say something about ourselves, placed in an object that is pretty much in everybody's hands. So it's a place that money is a thing that is always in the hands of the humans, but also it represents a lot symbolically about their country, their ideology, their identity as a country, as a group of a community. So I wanted to take these symbols and insert or draft in these animals and leave them there and think about how this animal is actually creating a sculpture for me in their context, just because I put this symbol inside. So it comes from a symbolic value insert in a nature value, but also living in there is creating value in terms of a gem, of a jewelry. Like these animals create luxurious objects, but only when they are uncomfortable or only when they are suffering. So also in this process, I wanted to put in our minds the position of the animal in these hierarchies, but also the conditions of these other living creatures with us as a community of living living beings. So. Yeah, at the end, I want to establish a different points of view of a one thing in one sculpture that also is not quite perfect, because the forms create a sculpture or a hem that is not quite perfect, but it's a reaction. It's a result of a reaction, and that reaction can be seen as a hem. Can be seen as an artwork, but also can be seen as a very sad, painful situation that lasts for 4 years in a living creature. So that was pretty much the general idea of this. I kept thinking about, the sculpture was for 4 years under the water, and the part that really kept me interested, I don't know, in my imagination, was always thinking about the thin layers, pretty much most of the time creating something that I cannot control. So a lot of the randomness and the luck of the sculpture was very much involved in that. It was storms around the area. Two very big storms passed. Many of the animals died. So only 7 survived, like the shell. So also that was part of the position of the project, to leave things in their natural way and wait and see what it will come, and have no expectations about what it was the result. But yes, in the process, had a lot of imagination, and yes, at the end, you still can think in all this process still. So
just to mention that you didn't. Hi, Jenny. You didn't do that process by yourself alone. It's a random process. You work with a biologist, and the pearl were created in an oyster farm. So she followed that process of this biology. No?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of. I'm trying to extract
in
it.
the video,
In the video you can see the process that we follow to create the draft. It's a process that is the same process that you do it to create a farm, create pearls. Farming, how is it?
Oyster farm.
Oyster farm. Right now they create pearls from draft it's a Japanese technique, was born in Japan. But I did this process in a farm, in a pearl farm, one of the last farms that still are working in Mexico City, in the Baja California Peninsula. In the last century, the Baja California Peninsula, at the same time that Japan discovered this process and started doing pearls in oyster farms. So they also changed the value of the pearl in the world. So they create processed pearls. So they change the value, economical value of many pearls, but also they change our way of thinking about pearls. In my beliefs, I think that they erase the magic around finding an extraordinary object that you find one in many oysters. So that's pretty much the way how many of the massive creations, like a product, massive products, do with many of our thinking, or many of our activities, or many of our maybe special products that are very handmade or whatever it is. So it's very similar, the process, the software, the pearl, than many other things in the world. Yeah. So it's most of the projects that I'm presenting here are around the pearl, the idea of the pearl. In this room, half of the room, we decide to offer some of the information, the research information that I have regarded in all these years. Images, objects, found objects, books from references, literature references, film references. But because I believe that is part of how, in many ways, I get to the ideas that I'm presenting here. In this part of the room, this is a piece that I create based on the mythological value. It's a myth that says that Cleopatra did a bit And to know at the moment of the Cleopatra was most in the power position, they made a bit to show everyone that she was the most powerful person and that she can offer the most expensive dinner ever offered. So she put one of the most valuable pearls at that moment, which was and put it in vinegar. So she drank the vinegar to present herself as a container of the most powerful and valuable and the wealthiest person at the moment. So I took that myth and recreated with an actress, and I was intrigued about how this myth have been stay in our minds and in our history, because only is one text in all the history of humans that says that this specifically thing happened. And it's a text that is written in that shell. It's a Plinio text, and Plinio's name that this happened very, very, very briefly. So I was intrigued about how these kind of situations is kept in our minds and stick in our minds as a way of also as a hypnotic way how wealth also sticks in our minds. When you think about wealth or luxury, it sticks in our minds in the same way that I think this kind of myth sticks with us. So I decided to recreate the whole myth. I asked an actress to drink a pearl that was that came from the same spot where the Cleopatra pearl was coming from, which is Bahrain. The kingdom of Bahrain at that point was the most of the where the most luxurious pearls came from at the moment. And she drank it in front of a lawyer. So the situation was, supervisor and established in a written by a lawyer. So I wanted to do the history, maintain the history, but more like a document and recreate the history, but like a helping Cleopatra to establish that this actually happened. And then she was a very powerful woman, and this is one of the examples of what she could do. And this, in the video you see a description of the lawyer, an actress drinking it, but also was I was interested in thinking the process of her body when she drank it. And I wanted to, in some way, extract the same pearls from their body, like with the tears, maybe. Just thinking a way to have back a piece of this pearl that was inside her body. So I took the tears and put it in a different, it evaporates, but
Can you just bear
Evaporation.
yeah, that's the process that I can allocate. With the tears, I create like a rehydrated a cell. Very, but it's a process that I just want to show how it recreates in some way from liquid. Like if it was it was solid, and then it was liquid, and then it was inside the body, and then it's liquid again, but solid again. So it's kind of like doing the whole process of creation.
I think this is important. As you're doing that process to create a value, you're now showing the process to the materiality of the material.
Yeah.
Sorry for the redundancy. No, how the pearl is diluted, liquid again, and then thin again. No? How is the physicity of this material?
Yeah, and I think that's another point that is important in that piece too. Like the materiality of how material creates value, but in this specific hem, it is created slowly and with thin layers and with a lot of work, like a very precise work, and any error or mistake in the process can make a pearl less value than others. So I'm kind of like obsessed with the
Or
transformation.
more value because it's an artwork. I don't know what's the most valuable.
That's another
artwork.
So just in the interest of time, because we have to go through some of the other exhibits, maybe we can summarize the video pieces, and then also Frizio will be talking again in Virginia on set tomorrow, so if you want to hear more, you can do that. So maybe just tell a little more about the videos, and then we can move on to the room.
Very fast.
But maybe right here, I think.
From here?
Yeah, we could just talk here, and then maybe later you can go and look.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, inside the room, I did a process that it kind of like recreate the way how farm-made pearls are made. I insert a real pearl, a natural pearl, inside a body. A very young person is hosting now a very valuable pearl in his body. I wanted to recreate the process, but to force ourselves to think about where the value is created and what do you choose as a value aspect of this piece of work or any in your real life thing. Like the idea was born in me looking at the community and seeing how more often the people from 18 to 25 years old are the most risk community or like a population in pretty much around the world. They are more exposed about killing, they are more exposed about overdoses, they are more exposed about many of the risks that contemporary society is offering for us. So I decided to take one of these young person from Mexico and ask him to be a volunteer of being hosting a valuable thing in their body. And somehow I wanted to, I think that if we don't see the beauty in this pearl, we might, in this like a discomfort of not being possible to see the beauty or to see the valuable thing, you might see other values. I don't know, maybe.
And visually is a parallelism between the invasion of the pearl and the invasion of the human. Right? It's like
like a two same constructions.
There's two videos. I mean, you can go and see them. We do have a warning now because in the video where the pearl gets put into the man's arm, you see the incision into the skin. So some people, that might be challenging for them to see.
It's really
it's very short. It's like 10 seconds.
Yeah, 10 seconds. Also, the image is the way how I took the pieces of the video is pretty much avoiding blood, avoiding the nature of violence in this, because I don't believe that this is a violent thing. I think it's just showing a position of an opinion. Yeah. So there really is not a lot of blood. It's quite
Sorry. Yeah, we need to be quick, but then the third video, just quickly, just to summarize.
At the end of the exhibition is a project that I did in Japan. I went to look for a community in Japan where are the women who are called AMA women, and they are a community of divers, of free divers, who for 2,000 years have been doing the free diving in the ocean, in a very cold part of the oceans. So they are called like, there are a lot of myths around them, and I wanted to do a project that make me to go there and do the whole trip there and look for them. And there's a few women that still live there from another AMA. It's a generation thing, so you only can be an AMA woman if you come from an AMA woman who your mother and your mother is also an AMA woman. So I think that the extinction, the possibilities of the extinction of this culture is very immediate. So I wanted to go and do a portrait of these three AMA women from generations who also have children that they don't want to be an AMA. So it will be the portrait of an end of a culture. So in the video you see AMA holding their breath as an analogy of when you die. you hold your breath, you stop breathing.
When you lose a value too.
Or you lose breath.
Well, many things.
That's a nice point to end on. I know there's probably tons of questions, maybe just one or two, and then we can move on to Hiromi. And again, they'll talk more tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah. There's so much content, I know.
I'm fascinated by the experiment that you're doing with inserting the pearl into the volunteer person. And I'm wondering if I'm going off on the wrong idea. I got from the earlier pieces that you were doing that you were really exploring the idea of how we create value almost without appreciating the natural process by sticking, in a pearl farm, in a cultured pearl farm. We put something in there and then suddenly we have all these perfect pearls and we've figured out a way to do that. But the animal has to do the hard work and the animal suffers to make that happen. So then, fast forward to the part where you're putting a pearl in a human being. Are you asking the viewers to consider, or is it possible that this is one of the ideas, to consider how we shouldn't be so thoughtlessly making decisions about value by being willing to do that? In other words, somebody might say, that's gross that you put this pearl under somebody's skin, right? But we don't think anything about putting it into an animal. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, it is one of the things that I want to direct your thinking. Because as I said in the beginning, I'm also putting in a discussion the hierarchical way of seeing all the species. We all, as a human, we decide which piece is less important than the other, and pretty much is always a point of view from humans deciding from others. And in that you can see it in society, how poor or rich are deciding for the way of living of others, from nothing thinking too much, deeply thinking in the suffering or the specific situations that they are going through.
So that really is a provocative thought and an important thought. So in your process is saying, I am going to take this to this point and ask another person like me, another human being, to be part of this experiment. Did you have any questions about doing that, or concerns about making that part of your process, or how did you come to terms with doing that?
I'm part of a community. I'm strongly related with my community most of the time. That's my way of living life. But as part of a community, I see how many people can commit with others to say something as in a protest. Like, many people get together to say something to make it louder. So if I do it myself, it will be the point of view of myself from a very a different position. But if you find someone else who say it with you, it's always going to be louder. It's always going to be a stronger way to say it. Yeah, that's what I say. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.